And now, today's featured speakers are Bentley University Professor Mark Davis and current Bentley parent, Jean-Pierre Comté. Mark is a professor of operations management and has taught at Bentley for 34 years. His primary research interest is service operations management with a focus on customer experience. He has co-authored 2 textbooks and published many articles in leading journals on these topics. JP is president of Barilla Americas based in Chicago. In this role, he is responsible for the North and South America operations of one of the world's largest Italian food companies, best known for its pastas. JP has 25 years of global experience in the fast-moving consumer goods industry. They'll both expand upon these introductions shortly, but without further ado, please join me in virtually welcoming Professor Mark Davis and JP Comté.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah. Thank you. Welcome, everybody.
Okay. JP, you want to start off and talk about your background a little bit, and then I'll talk about mine, and then I'll give an outline of what we're going to talk about today.
Sure, Mark. So welcome, everybody, and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. So I'm Jean-Pierre Comté, but I go with JP since I relocated in the US 7 years ago. I'm in charge, as Emily said, of North and South America for Barilla. I'm not Italian, I'm not American, I'm French. Nobody's perfect. I spent, it's now 10 years that I work for Barilla. I started based in Paris 10 years ago in the same job, but in charge of our business of Western Europe. And before, I spent almost 20 years with P&G, Procter & Gamble, on almost every category. Baby care, laundry detergents, blades and razors, and shampoos, and all of that in France, in Italy, in Switzerland, and in the US.
Okay, and just a brief background on myself. I've got a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Tufts, and then worked for General Electric for 5 years as a manufacturing engineer. Went back and got my MBA at Boston University in operations management. Worked at the Army Research Labs in Natick, designing food service systems for the military, and then went back and got my doctorate in business administration with a concentration in operations management again, and have been working at Bentley ever since. So I bounced back and forth from industry to academia several times. So let's start off, okay? So just to give people an overview or an outline of what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about Barilla's current operations in North America, and then we're going to talk about how the COVID-19 crisis that we're all experiencing right now has affected Barilla's operations. And then JP is going to talk about what strategies Barilla has adopted to increase its capacity. And the word I'd like to use is surge capacity, and the ability to get up to very high capacities in a very short amount of time to meet the unexpected increase that they've experienced in demand. Next, we're going to ask what the challenges are in outsourcing production to third parties, okay, and trying to maintain the same consistency and quality and delivery schedules. And the last, what are some of the lessons learned from the current crisis that will provide us with some insights going forward in the future, so we have similar experiences in the future. They don't have to be, for lack of a better word, so painful, okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's start off, JP, with use as a springboard for our discussion, and just provide an overall an overview or description of Barilla's operations and supply chain in North America.
Sure. So I will start from some big facts and figures about the company. So Barilla is the name of a brand, but it's also the name of the company. So we are an Italian company, 150 years, still family owned. Based in Parma, so which is the center of Emilia-Romagna, and it's the fourth generation of shareholders. And here in the US, and we came in the US a little bit more than 25 years ago, coming with the Barilla brand. We started with pasta. We also have some sauces. Today, I think that Mark will focus on pasta, because this is I would say the most of our business in the US. We are market leaders. We own basically a third of the dry pasta market, and we produce most of what we sell in the US and Canada in 2 plants. One is based in Ames, Iowa, where we also mill the grain that we turn into flour before turning it into pasta. And we have another plant in Avon, New York, close to Rochester. Knowing that Ames is sourcing mostly the Midwest and the West Coast, while Avon is sourcing most of the East Coast as well as Canada, where our two biggest markets are Ontario and Quebec. So it makes more sense to source them from the northeast of the US.
Okay. Quick question as we were talking about, and it just came to mind. Do you mill the flour for Avon in Ames, or do they get it from a separate source?
No, we mill it in Ames, and so we use 2/3 of this flour for the Ames plant. We manufacture in Ames basically 200,000 tons of dry pasta every year, and 1/3 of this flour is shipped
Okay.
to Avon.
Okay. So today, the subject on everybody's mind is the COVID-19 crisis. Mm-hmm. And as we said earlier, it's affecting everybody we know. How has demand for Barilla's products changed as a result of this crisis? And what steps has Barilla North America taken to address the worldwide COVID-19 crisis in general?
Yes. So everything started, I would say, from Italy. The 21st of February, we've put in place a global crisis team in Italy because Italy was, after China, the second country which has been hit pretty hard by this COVID-19. And 5 days later, we did exactly the same in North America. So we established a crisis team, which is made basically of all functional heads, as well as the heads of the plants. Because as of I would say the last week of Feb, we received from our customers unusual orders. Everybody probably experienced the shopping experience of the first weeks of March in stores, where basically the shelves of some products as pasta were under huge pressure. And so we made the decision to put in place this team to cope with the situation, which was unusual, where we had two kinds of pattern. The food service business, so serving the bars and restaurants and hotels, dropping as a stone, as most of these businesses had to shut down overnight. And on the opposite, the retail business, so the Walmart, the Costco, the Target, e-commerce, ramping up like hell, and more than offsetting, by the way, what we had lost in food service.
It's interesting. I was talking with someone, another Bentley alum, who is the president of a wholesale seafood distributor in Boston, and he said they were experiencing the same thing. If you want to call it channel shift, where yes, the food service business has just fallen off like crazy, and some of it, but not all of it, has been able to be picked up by the increase in demand in the supermarkets, and it's still struggling to adjust in terms of how to do that.
And so to continue the answer on the question, the three key priorities we had as of day one, so as of February the 26th, was one, obviously, to ensure the safety of our employees and our consumers. So make sure that the products that we ship are safe. The second one was to protect the company, and so basically put the supply chain in a kind of bubble. And I'm sure that we will talk about it more in details. And the third priority will be to support the communities we were close to. Some of them are being hit very hard by this crisis, and so that's why, as of day one, both in terms of products or cash, we helped some of the customers working with us usually, and which were unfortunately having to shut doors.
Okay, I had another question, because Barilla's headquartered in Europe, and the virus hit Europe first. Do you feel you got more advance notice of what was coming than, say, other companies that are located primarily in North America?
I think so. The awareness of this stuff was fairly high in the company. As a matter of fact, we we grounded all people internationally as of the 28th of Feb, because we knew what was happening in Italy.
Okay.
And so it definitely gave us probably a couple of weeks of advantage. We've put in place as of the 3rd of March masks and gloves and
Wow.
and all the distanciation measures in our 2 plants, while the CDC at that time was still looking at it as an option for the future. So yes, we probably had an advantage having our home in Italy.
Okay, great. Yeah, could you suggest a strategy or a way of prioritizing how companies in general could adopt for increasing their capacity to what I call surge capacity, unexpected increase in capacity far beyond anything expected, and how they can do it in a really short period of time? It's like, asking for the impossible, but companies have done and are able to react to this in many different ways.
Sure. Yes, and so if I come back to the capacity that we have in Ames and Avon, so we can produce 300,000 tons every year, and suddenly in the first 2-3 weeks of March, we had orders which were in the range of 2.5 times, 3 times, 4 times what we could supply. Okay, so it was obvious that we could not fulfill all of the orders, and we had to find some solutions. We had a little bit of additional capacity, but very minimal. And so the decision that we've made as of the 3rd week of March was to cut heavily in our assortments to make sure that we would ship only what we call the stars, so the key SKUs that American families are looking for. And so I'm talking about the penne, the spaghetti, the elbows, and probably remove some shapes of pasta which are less popular. And so we've cut the assortment. Usually we manufacture about 75 shapes of pasta. We went down to 25 as a way to increase the productivity in the plants, because obviously the more you have complexity at plant level, the more you need to stop the lines, to change the dyes, and so you in these 2 or 3 hours that you lose, obviously you lose manufacturing capacity. And as the name of the game was we need to continue to source what we are asked for. We reduce this complexity in our plants. And the third activity that we've put in place was also to connect with a network of co-manufacturers or co-packers, because sometimes when we have some peak in terms of consumption, we rely on these co-manufacturers to see if they had some available capacity to be able to offer us. So these are the 3 things. So push the lines 24/7. All lines full speed. The second one was about reducing complexity to maximize the output of the plants. And the third one, go to co-packers. And even doing that, we were very short in terms of supply versus the...
Now you have, in our previous conversations, you mentioned that you have a finished goods inventory, which really gave you some time to ramp up. How much finished goods inventory typically? On
an average basis, we have between 25 and 30 days.
Okay.
And so when we, at the end of Feb again, when we saw that this was bad, and when we saw what was happening in Italy, in France, in Germany, in Spain, in terms of panic buying from the consumers, we pushed the lines at full capacity. And so when we've got the wave, we had probably 20, 27, 28 days. So we were in the high side of the safety stock that we have usually. Needless to say that the month of March not only have eaten this safety stock, but all that we produce in March went straight also to the customer.
That inventory sort of gave you a buffer
Absolutely.
to react more quickly. How about on the incoming side? You have raw material in the grains. How easily can you get that increased from your suppliers?
So yes, we the main the only raw material that we use for pasta is a different kind of wheat than the wheat that you use to make your bread or to make your pastries. This wheat is called common wheat. What we buy is a wheat which is called durum wheat, which is a hard wheat, which is higher in protein content to give to the pasta the al dente texture that we as Italian brand want to offer to the consumer. Okay, the biggest market, by the way, where durum wheat grows in the world are what we call the Northern Plains, which is North Dakota in the US, but even more importantly, what grows in Canada. And so I would say that 95% of the wheat that we use in Ames and Avon is coming from these geographies. Okay, a small part of it comes from the desert. So we buy some wheat in Arizona, which is a wheat that we don't like because it's a wheat which is very expensive, both for the planet and for our P&L. But sometimes we have to buy it because this is a wheat extremely rich in protein content. And when the one coming from the Northern Plains is too poor in protein content, we need to blend it with the desert durum wheat. So to answer your question, there is no tension because the inventories of durum wheat from the past year was still fairly high. And so we didn't have any disruption in terms of sourcing of durum wheat to Ames mill. This is not the main problem. This wheat, by the way, comes by train, so there is absolutely no issues in terms of truck transportation and availability of trucks. So this part of the supply chain was very safe and is still very safe.
And the big advantage you have is that your upstream supply chain is pretty short. You know, I mean, you don't have a lot of suppliers and sub-suppliers and tier 2, 3 suppliers. So that's a big advantage that you have. You mentioned outsourcing production when you need to, and typically that's more expensive than doing it in-house. But also there are other challenges associated when you outsource a brand name like Barilla. Can you talk about some of those challenges that you face, and then how do you address those?
Sure. So the cost is definitely one of them, because if you don't invest in capex in a plant, you need to accept that the cost will charge this capex that you did not invest. But at least as important, the quality consistency is also important. Barilla is well known all around the globe with this iconic blue box with the red oval for the consistency of its pasta. Okay, so no matter where you buy this pasta, summer, winter, Canada, US, or China or Italy, you will have the same al dente consistency that you are looking for. And so the relationship with your network of co-packers has to be built upfront. Okay, it's not a relationship that you can start building in a moment as the one that we experienced in the past 5 or 6 weeks. Okay, so these are relationships that we've built over years. Again, we leverage these co-packers when we have a peak of consumption. Back to school is typically a peak of consumption, and when our 2 plants cannot cope with this spike. And so since then, working between our engineers and their engineers, we managed to get the same quality than the one that we produce ourselves.
Oh, great. I actually use Barilla pasta. I enjoy cooking. This is a digression. And one of the things I found is you can cook it for an extra couple of minutes and it doesn't degrade the quality of the al dente, for lack of a better words, which I've noticed with other pastas. If I happen to leave it in the water too long, it gets really mushy and starchy. So I just...
Yes. And you obtain it. There are two important elements to get the al dente texture that you describe. One is the quality of the raw material. If you buy a superior durum wheat, you will have more chance to make a good pasta than a bad pasta. And the second one is the manufacturing process. Okay, so through the milling, but also the way to mix water and flour and then extrude it, and as importantly also the drying process. Okay, it has to be not too dry, not too wet. It has to be not too short, not too long, because if you do it wrong, the pasta will start breaking. You will release a lot of starches in the boiling water. So what you describe as a poor experience. So
Great. I didn't want to digress, but I'm saying I really enjoyed.
No, but we became very good in these processes.
Yeah, and that's great. Just looking forward, you've gone through a lot of, for lack of a better word, challenges in the last couple months, meeting these unexpected increases in demand and how you address it, and the issues with the I'm talking students with workers in terms of ensuring their safety. And this worldwide pandemic that we're experiencing, and one form or another can happen again in the future. Are there some lessons learned here that you could suggest so that people, companies, individuals, governments could be better prepared to address this, even though it's not going to happen that often, hopefully, but they can be better prepared for addressing it,
Yes, the biggest challenge since day one was to ensure the continuity of our operations. Okay, and so as I told it before, putting our plants in a bubble to avoid that COVID-19 would get into the plant or to try to slow down if we had to have it. I'm very glad to report, by the way, that as I speak, we don't have any case, neither in Ames nor in Avon. So putting in place all the measures which were coming from the Italian CDC, because again, we follow first the Italian equivalent of the CDC, then the American one, being very aware, has been the challenge and continues to be the challenge. Okay, so to make sure that we don't have to shut down a plant or shut down some lines because we have any contamination. So I think that in the future we will probably go even a step further in terms of robotics and mechanics at plant level, because again, robots they are not sick. And so as long as we can continue to strengthen the safety of our products and safety of our employees, we will continue to go in this direction. Then after we had other challenges, of course, the fact that suddenly 160 people, which is the people working here in Chicago in our US headquarters, moving them overnight to full work at home is also a challenge, because you need to adopt new ways of working, and I will not teach you because you have to do the same with your students today. So it's a challenge. And then down the road, we start seeing obviously some challenges more from a consumer point of view. So we need to relearn what the consumer will expect in a post-COVID-19 environment, as we start seeing some shifts. You were mentioning the shifts between channels, so less food service, more at-home cooking, but there are also some shifts in terms of consumer preferences.
Okay, I've been reading in the papers and seeing in the news that comments like the food supply chain is broken.
Yes. I've read that this weekend. I think that it's a quote of Mr. Tyson, so the CEO of Tyson Foods. Right. Because they had to face with worrying situations in some of their plants. Right. But the way we work, as far as I've understood, the way we work in a plant processing meat is very different from the way we work in a plant processing pasta. Right. What I've understood is that you have many people in a plant processing meat, and they are very close one to the other. Whereas in a plant processing pasta, you have many people in a plant processing pasta, and they are very close one to the other. So while in the plant processing pasta on a line which is about 80 yards, you will find between 3 and 4 people. Okay, everything is already very, very mechanical.
You think the fact that you got warning ahead of time from Europe played a role in terms of
it helps a lot. It helps a lot.
Being much more proactive.
It helped a lot, and the same way we learned on the plant level, we learn now also on the office from the office point of view, because they will be back to the office in the next couple of weeks. And so here as well, we want to leverage their learnings as we will probably reopen as soon as the stay-at-home orders will be lifted here in Illinois.
Okay, great. I think this would probably be a good time to stop. We're about halfway through, and maybe open it up to some questions. So Emily?
All right, we'll start with one of the questions that was submitted ahead of time. So here's a question from Akash Garg, one of our most recent alums, class of 2019. What will happen once people begin to go out more often and work and begin to eat out more? How will you account for that?
It's very difficult. First of all, because we will not behave all the same. And it will depend by market. It will depend also by cultures. It will depend on individual choices too. But what the big trends that we start seeing is that the food service world will probably need to reinvent itself. Okay, we hardly see lots of people packed in the same sport bar as we were seeing it not even 2 months ago. So we know that people will get out, but they will have probably different expectations in terms of social distanciation within the facility, in terms of hygiene, in terms of the ways they will be served by the waiters. So this the trend that we see of eating more at home is here to stay. We know it's here to stay for 2 reasons. The first one is that people will continue to be a little bit scared about going into potentially crowded venues. But we also have to acknowledge that millions of families will be under significant stress, financially speaking, and so they will have to continue to cook at home. There is a more positive way to look at it, and we start seeing it in some research that we had last week. Americans also rediscover the value of being all together in the kitchen, which is not only for the functional benefit of feeding yourself and your family, but also for the more emotional benefit of the kitchen became the sanctuary as the world outside looks scary, and so we come back all around the same table, and we re-establish some conversations, some connections between the members of the households that we had probably lost in the previous world. So I think that for all of these reasons, even if people hopefully they will start getting out and enjoy some restaurants or bars, but this mega trend of cooking at home will stay for some years.
Yeah. I think I'd also like to add is that from what I'm reading and seeing, a lot of these restaurants will not open. Maybe a third to a half of them just will not make it through to the other side, so to speak. And I've noticed just in the area where I am, it's interesting, those restaurants that had the ability to do takeout in addition to in dining are doing better than those who just didn't do any takeout, and those who didn't do any takeout at all are closed totally. They're not doing anything right now.
Yes, and here as well, to complete what you said, Mark, while the big chains, the Chipotle, the McDonald's will find their way in this new environment, the family-owned businesses will have probably harder times, okay, because they did not enter in this crisis with the same balance sheet, so they didn't have the same accessibility to cash, to the banks,
right?
And so some of them, unfortunately, will struggle big times to reopen their doors.
Right. All right.
All right, next question. All right, we've got some live questions already. So if you haven't submitted a live question and you have one, feel free to put it in the Q&A box. This question comes from Gang Lee, and they want to know, we have been prompting the concept of lean operations in industry in decades to reduce the inventory as low as possible. We know you talked about Barilla had a small buffer there. With this global pandemic around, do you think we should rethink the zero inventory principle, but stock high for uncertain demands like this?
Mark, do you want to take it? It's a question for experts.
General expert. I think a lot of it depends on the type of business that you're running. The idea with inventories, was the common way of doing business in the 50s and 60s. And the idea was to protect what they call a technical core, because there was not a lot of change in products from year to year. But once you start introducing new products and new concepts and innovation, the lean concept really dictates in terms of how you do that. I think the challenge is those companies that do lean should continue doing lean, in my mind. And the reason and the challenge that they face is, how do they react when there is a problem? Okay, and a good example was in the 90s, Toyota, who was the leader in operationalizing the lean concepts, had one of their suppliers have a fire in one of their plants. And within 2 hours, all of the Toyota plants were closed. And the experts estimated it was going to be 5 to 6 weeks before Toyota production was going to ramp up again. But not only was Toyota shut down, but all of their suppliers were also shut down. And they all worked together. And within a matter of, I think it was 3 days, okay, they were back making product. It wasn't the most efficient, and it wasn't the fastest way of doing it, but they were able to start producing product, and Toyota was able to get up and running. Again, the lesson learned here was the idea of doing pre-planning. I saw on 60 Minutes the other day where General Motors was shut down, but all of a sudden they decided that they could do ventilators. And according to the fellow who was North American manager for manufacturing, took 3 weeks from what they called from discussion to production of ventilators in one of GM's plants. So if you do this ahead of time, what I call pre-planning, and working this out with your suppliers, and JP's done this in terms of his outsourcing and subcontracting, you need to do this ahead of time and establish these relationships. It goes much faster and much quicker. So that's a long answer to a short question, but I think that's where I should stop, I guess.
Yeah, on dry pasta, dry pasta is quite of a cheap product, which means that a tight working capital, tight cash flow is extremely important to manage, and so we need a lot of discipline. We don't sell products which cost, I don't know, $1,000 a pound, where there you can be more, I would say, flexible on many things. So 4 weeks of inventory in a linear environment, obviously, is the best sweet spot to manage this cash at best. Okay. Yes, what we live now is so unusual. And every 6 months, we spend half a day together with my leadership team in what we call crisis management training. And so the agency we work with, they usually come with crazy scenarios of sabotage in the plant and terrorism and bacteriological attack or whatever, but they never came with the scenario we are in today. Even if they are super creative, this one they did not see it. Okay, it happened, and for sure it will ask us to re-challenge some ways we operate, including maybe the inventory management.
And to piggyback off of this concept of, having enough supply, one person asks, do you expect any positive impacts from the reduction in global emissions on the raw materials you're purchasing, i.e. increasing wheat supply, in turn decreasing cost?
I can answer for pasta, but I'm sure that Mark will have a broader answer. We don't have operations. Again, we source our durum wheat from the north of the US and in the south of Canada, so we don't import it from Asia or whatever. What we know for sure, and most of the experts of the supply chain, they agree on that, is that the concept of globalized supply chains can be probably outdated in the new world, because we see it. The supply chains which were probably the most able to answer to these peaks were local supply chains. Okay, so the shorter it is, the better, because as you have many disruptions in air freight, in ocean freight, the closer you are to your consumer, the better. So we learned it as we here in the US. We have a local supply chain. In other parts of the world, we have more, I would say, regional supply chains, and they have probably been slower to answer to this peak.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Again, when I was talking to the wholesale distributor in Boston, they said a lot of their fresh fish comes in by plane, and the number of flights coming in from Europe has decreased significantly, so that's had a big impact. There's also been a growing trend in food service, especially on farm to table, and using much more of the local suppliers in that respect, and that's been a big move, and that decreases the emissions and everything else in that area.
Yeah. There will be on top, but I don't want to enter in politics again, but I think there will be also a dimension of supporting your local community. To this last point, Mark, so as a way to solve some of the burning issues that we start having in terms of unemployment, relocating some manufacturing in more locally could help also to solve this issue. So if it can be good for you as a worker, but good for the planet at the same time.
Great. Now talking about a different kind of benefit, have you seen a shift in your P&L due to the shift in who is buying your product now? More supermarkets, less restaurants, and are the margins better in one channel versus the other?
No, because we in order to be fair with our customers, we try to as much as we can to manage them within a kind of corridor, which is extremely tight. So we cannot talk about margins. We obviously, the spike in demand generated a lot of efficiencies at plant level, and so it's good for your P&L because the less complexity you have to manage, the better it is for your bottom line. But part of it has been offset by the fact that we had to put in place lots of measures at plant levels. So the thermometer, the scanners, all the masks, etc., etc. The cost of logistics went up as well because we all fight for the same trucks, and so we saw a spike also in this area. We start having, as you can imagine, the demand playing in their favor too. We start having also a spike in terms of durum wheat. So the cost of durum wheat doesn't follow the same curve as the cost of oil today, for instance. So we cannot say that at the end of the party it's going to be beneficial. And I don't mention even the fact that we want to continue to support the communities. And so a family-owned company. And it's not that I want to say bad things about the company I was working for before, but those families, they are not interested in big peaks and big valleys in terms of bottom line. Okay, they are there for the last 150 years. They have only one obsession: how can they drop the company to the fifth generation in a fairly good shape, and that's it. So they don't like when they start seeing some EBITDA going up and down depending on the years. They prefer by far a more stable growth.
All right, and you talked a little bit about the added cost. Perhaps both of you can speak to this, but how has transportation operations to deliver, how has that changed differently or faster?
Let me give JP a break for a second here, and he can add
Yeah.
on. Yeah, one of the things in talking to people is particularly transportation in the U.S. is becoming, I think in our discussion, JP used as a bottleneck. There's been a challenge in that it's harder and harder to get long-haul truck drivers. The average age is 55. And when I talked to the person with the wholesale fish, seafood business in Boston, he also highlighted the fact that long-haul truck drivers are creating the bottleneck in terms of how are you able to do that. Now, Google's coming up with the autonomous drivers, and that's going to help solve the problem to some extent. But that's a real crisis now, in terms of how do we get food, especially with the longer the supply chain, the greater distances it has to be hauled over.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we saw exactly the same phenomenon especially in the recent past, where the unemployment rate in the US was extremely low. Lots of people who were truck drivers decided to make another job. Now I don't know what will happen. For sure, there will be a slowdown in terms of goods traveling, because some categories will and start being impacting what we call the non-essential categories. So are probably in a slowdown mode. So maybe it will rebalance a little bit the market, but yes, it's still a very tight market.
Another one, perhaps you can start with, Mark. Why are so many currently high demand items, for example, toilet paper, disinfectants, flour, still constantly sold out at stores? And how can that problem be fixed from a supply standpoint?
There's I think of the right word, in terms of when people expect something to happen, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I remember back in the 70s, all of a sudden someone, when there was a gas shortage, someone said, well, there's going to be a shortage on toilet paper. And what happens is everybody runs out and buys all the toilet paper they can buy. And yep, there's a shortage. So some of these, the demand's gone up. In other words, in my recent trips to the supermarket, I've seen the Lysol, the napkins, paper towels, toilet paper. The aisles are empty. In frozen food area, frozen food pizzas, frozen vegetables, all gone. And right now it's just that spike in demand. People are stocking up. You start reading about there's a 25% reduction in pork production because of the closing of the plants. There's a 10% reduction in beef production, and that's only going to exacerbate the problems. People are going to go out and grab stuff and throw it in their freezer, and until their freezers are stocked up, and I don't know how else you can do it. People are going to do it. It's that herd mentality. Everybody's buying this stuff. I must be buying it too,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I don't have anything to add. So pasta was part of these categories together with beans, together with rice. So shelf-stable products that you can put in your cabinet, and in case things last weeks or months, you can still have access to them. So.
Great. Another question about sort of being available in the grocery store. Nikhil Sachdeva, a graduate of 2017, asks, is this an appropriate time to introduce new products to grocery store chains?
You should ask a marketing person that. I'm in,
So yes and no. No in the short term, because we both in terms of communication, marketing, and in terms of innovation, we've put things on hold now. Communication, because obviously the consumers today don't want to see the usual communications that you were making in a different environment. Most of these copies, advertisings, they are now irrelevant, if not counterproductive. And so as I speak, our marketing is the marketing teams, they are tweaking the messages and the content to make it relevant in a context where people, they have 10 boxes of pasta and they are fed up, and so we just need to help them to cook them in a way which will be joyful, delicious, and so it's a different marketing. So you use different tactics, different channels. You are much more digital than TV. And for innovation, the same. Today, because of lack of trust in the future, because of I want to get back to what I know, the brands I know, the products I know, it's not time to go to with this kind of fancy innovations that most of the families, by the way, cannot afford in the current context. So that's why we've put this on hold, without mentioning the fact that when you work on innovation, when you start going through the test of industrialization, you need to do it in your plants. Again, as I don't want any complexity in my plant, I don't want to stop the lines to try some dry runs of innovation. So that's why I told the supply chain, focus on shipping the products, and the R&D team, pause a minute. We will get back to innovation in the near future.
Okay, so kind of to spin that, Lisette Diamant, a graduate of 2009 rather, is wondering, are there new business opportunities to grow a brand in this time?
Mark?
Yeah, I'd have to think. I don't have an answer for that right away.
Yeah, this they are for sure. The first reflex of consumers was, again, to get back to big names of the past. Okay, and so that if you look at what Kraft Heinz and Campbell's, their financial results of Jan, Feb, March, they are fantastic, because these are brands that everybody trusts. Okay, it's not good, it's not bad, it's a fact. And so this is where the families went. As we will come to a new normal, here as well, expectations will change, and people will expect from brands different things. We saw some trends coming before COVID-19, which will be accelerated. I will take one: plant-based proteins. It started to be big, and no later than 2 years ago, we did launch a range of pasta, which is a legume pasta. Pasta, instead of being made of wheat, it's made of lentil flour or chickpea flour. Okay, this trend will accelerate, and we see it now in the panel data, the Nielsen or IRI that we buy, because most of the consumers, either they don't have the money to buy meat, or for philosophical reasons, they want to have access to different kinds of proteins, which are not meat, which are not animal-based proteins. So this trend will be there, and so people innovating in this space will for sure be very much on track.
All right, here's a question that speaks to the future as well. Kristen Kennedy, class of 2005, wants to know, what trends do you predict or see in supply chain technology coming out of the COVID era? This one's for both of you.
Technology. Well, in terms of technology, I said earlier, I think you'll see a lot more with the autonomous truck driving, okay? And that's going to have a big impact. I think you will see, again, we've mentioned this earlier, shorter supply chains, particularly with food. Okay, the farm to table, fork, field to fork type of thing. The big challenge is in the United States, especially, is quite often people buy primarily on the basis of price, okay? And so if consumers are willing to pay more for higher quality products and to support local farmers, for example, that's a trend that should grow. In Europe, because I've taught in Europe several times, I've noticed in talking to colleagues, people tend to go to the local butcher, go to the local boulangerie. Is that the right word, boulangerie, for the bakery?
Yeah.
You know? And when times get tough, they will, shift over to buying at supermarkets. But as soon as times get better, they go back to the local butchers. But the local butcher doesn't really exist anymore in the United States, and so you got to change the mindset, in my opinion, of the customers, because they're going to drive what the market produces. And if it's just based on price, they're going to get the lowest cost and not necessarily the best in terms of quality or supporting local farmers and dairymen, so to speak. Do you have something to add to that, JP?
Yes, basically to build on your last point, I think that blockchain as a way to reinforce the traceability of the product could accelerate potentially, because what we started to see it, especially with the millennials and Gen Z. People are more and more interested in knowing what's in the box and who's behind this box. And so I think that given what happened now and the discussions that we had on global versus local, etc., people will be incredibly curious to buy kilometer zero, as we say it in Europe, or from farm to plate, as we say it here in the US.
All right, with that, we have time for one more question, I think, that would wrap things up very nicely. From Brian Filson, class of 2003, what are your expected future changes that will remain constant even after this pandemic?
Say that again. I want to make sure I answer.
Yeah. What will remain constant? What have been the changes that will remain constant after this pandemic? If things truly go back to normal, what are some of the things that will remain that have been innovated on?
I think we've alluded to that earlier. And the biggest thing I see that has to remain constant is this need to do pre-planning. I mean, when I'm looking at the supply chains, what's happening at the company level, at the state or local government level, at the national or federal government, it's the biggest problems are attributed to the lack of pre-planning. Because when you do things ad hoc, oftentimes, you're shooting from the seat of your pants and you don't make good decisions because you don't have the time to think things out. And I think and I hope that at all levels, this constant thing that will remain constant in the future is that the need, to do pre-planning at all levels and have contingency plans, for lack of a better word, in place, so that when these things do pop up, all right, we know exactly what's going to happen. A good example is in services, for example, they have a thing called service recovery. And service recovery says basically, service companies know that they're going to make mistakes. Mistakes happen, okay? But they have a plan in place, okay? So that when a mistake happens, they know exactly what people are going to do, as opposed to just throwing up their hands and saying to the customer, gee, we don't have a hotel room for you tonight. I'm sorry about that. That's your problem. In contrast, they have, we have a plan. We made a reservation for you, blah, blah, blah. But there's a plan in place. And what the studies have shown is when you have these plans in place, first of all, customers are much happier. Mm-hmm. And it just smooths things over. So I would emphasize the need to constantly have some type of pre-planning. And JP's talked about this. They have this crisis management that they're constantly looking at. And that's something, you don't see the return on the dollar today, okay? But down the road, it's going to show you big returns. I don't know if you wanted to add to that, JP.
Yes, and then to your point, Mark, as we don't have the crystal balls, you need to work on scenarios, okay? And so we have some scenarios for the world post-COVID, but before the vaccine. And we have some scenarios for the world post-COVID, but after the vaccine, okay? Because people will behave differently in these two different environments. What we know for sure is that no one of these scenarios, pre or post vaccine, is the same than the one that we had before, the world before COVID, as well as the one where we live now. Okay, it's different. What will stay or will accelerate or will change versus the world before for sure will be the way of working. So people now, they learned how to work from home. Some of them hate, some of them love, but it will change the way of working of each and every one for sure. Okay, right. So and the companies has to cope with it. What's going to change as well is the commerce will change. So the rise of e-commerce that we see now, because some people, they don't want to get exposed to grocery stores or whatever, and so the e-commerce is booming for food as well, not only for non-food categories. So some of it will stay. Okay, and so we better put ourselves in the best condition to win in this environment. Marketing will change. So we were spending a big chunk of our marketing on experiential. And so you are in the middle of a food fair, or you are in a supermarket and you make people taste your products. As you can imagine, in a post-COVID-19 world, these kind of activities will not work. And so marketing will be more digital. Also from 20% of the marketing budget 3 years ago, we probably spend today more than 60% of marketing on digital and not on the traditional media that you on TV or print or whatever. So it will not be the world as we have known it before. It will not be the world that we know now, because it's not a world which would be sustainable for anybody.
It's a new normal.
We work on scenarios, and hopefully one of them will not be that far from what will happen.
Well, thank you both. Do you have any final thoughts or comments for our audience before we sign off?
The only thing I can say is that the new normal is going to be nothing what the old normal looked like. And we must be flexible in terms of accepting that. I think it's going to change in the supply chains, the food supply chain, the healthcare supply chain. I think education is going to change. Now, we talked about this before at Bentley, where they're going to a trimester. There's a whole bunch of new initiatives that are taking place in terms of planning for the future.
Yes, no, the only comment to complement what Mark said is it's difficult to say it now that we are in the middle of this storm, but there are probably much more opportunities in the next world than the one before. And I'm not talking about pasta. I'm talking about things that we were doing because it was an habit, or because we were, in this vortex, and so we were doing things without challenging them. Who could have said, even 3 months ago, that we would speak today, 200 people here, nobody would have put a dime on this idea, and today we do it, and it's probably better for the planet. It avoids me to travel to Boston. I would have loved, because I have a son in Bentley, but still. So that's why everybody in this new game will have a role to play. First, as consumers, okay? Your vote matters even more than the vote at the presidential election. If you want to see this world changing, every time you pick a product on the grocery shelf or online or wherever, you vote.
Right.
You vote for the world you want to see. So let's all start from there. Before asking to CEOs, politicians, etc., to change the world, I think that the best vector to change this world is us as consumers.
That's a great way to say it. You vote with your feet. In terms of
you vote with your dollars.
Right. Okay.
Well, thank you both. On behalf of Bentley University and on behalf of the Office of Alumni and Family Engagement, thank you, Mark. Thank you, JP. This was wonderful. Again, the recording will be sent around to everybody tomorrow. We hope you enjoyed, and we will see you again next time.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Mark.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.